Well, good afternoon. And for those of you who are tuning in, this is the season of December here in San Diego. And I've got my dear friend from Boston in with us, Tom Rogerson, who really is going to be sharing some wonderful thoughts. But whether you're listening to this in December live, or whether you are watching the video later, or maybe it's in June, I just happen to know that from the research that December and around the holiday season, while it is oftentimes a great time of joy for many, it's unfortunately also a time of suicides and great despondency and desperation for others. And so I was talking with my wife about this. I said, honey, we just don't have the time to do this, but I'm just really feeling compelled that we need to put something out for those that might be struggling right now. And so when it comes to having positive insights and really having transformative type of conversations, there's nobody better at that than Tom and Kathy Rogerson. And so, Tom, thank you so much for joining us and making time, because I know you guys are really, really busy too. You had a 2-hour call this morning. It totally train wrecked your morning, but bless your heart, that's just what you do.
Well, thank you, RJ. You've run into the same thing, but yes, it's a busy time of year, but this is great. And I agree with you totally that this is a time of year that is such a blessing for so many families, but some families have issues that they struggle with. And how do we help families just build stronger families and get through these times really effectively, and not just get through them, but actually grow through them? And that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. And we've also got some fun that we're going to be doing as well. So this is a season of giving, and you've got something you're going to share with us as we get further into it. So again, welcome everyone. I'm just going to do a quick overview just so you know who the heck we are for those of you who don't. I'm RJ Kelly. I'm founder and chief visionary officer of the Wealth Legacy family of companies, and we get paid to ask very intrusive questions through our Wealth Legacy assessment, our critical action roadmaps. And through that, we create comprehensive and integrated plans that help to grow assets more significantly, but at the same time, mitigate risk in the assets. But this is where Tom and I overlap. My background and passion is also about creating clarity within families in the business side of things, and in legacy issues and philanthropy. And on top of that, many of our clients, not all of them, but most of them own a privately held company, or maybe they are the second or third generation of a privately held company. And so we deal with business succession and exit planning strategies. Along that line, we most specifically work with tools that either defer the recognition of tax for up to 30 years, or can completely eliminate the tax on sale of, say, a business, or on appreciated assets like real estate and other things. And oftentimes it's by including non-traditional planning tools with traditional. By that, I mean there are certain tools that we use that have a philanthropic output. And so you can do great things for yourself and your family if you're willing to do great things also for other people's families. And it's been in the tax code since 1969. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough advisors that know about it or use it and recommend it for their clients. But there's a whole host of different tools. Love to talk to you more about that later. I am a certified exit planning advisor, among a couple other credentials that you see after my name, where we deal with these issues on both the sale and the wealth transition. And by wealth, I mean that more than just financial. Wealth, yeah, financial wealth, that's part of it, but there's also emotional and relational and intellectual and physical and especially spiritual wealth. And that's, again, we're going to be hearing more about that from Tom here shortly. Typical client for ours is in the $8.5 to $10 million net worth, but we are also finding now that there are banks in this low interest rate environment that are willing to loan business owners, especially, or professionals, money, as long as their estate is anywhere from $5 million up, or some cases $7.5 million and up, and loan them money at very low interest rates that we can put into special kinds of vehicles that grow with no tax, outside the reach of creditors, and then in the future can come in with no tax, or that we can transfer those assets on multi-generationally. So on top of that, one of my world filters, in addition to being a follower of Jesus, another world filter is to facilitate $1 billion for philanthropy. And we crossed 100 million in August of 2012. We're well on our way for our second 100 million. And a lot of times that's just comes from redirecting involuntary philanthropy, better known as taxes, and redirecting that towards voluntary philanthropy of the family's goal. So there's a little contact information for me and our office phone, or just go to wealthlegacygroup.com, our website, and find out more. So quick bio, as I mentioned, when it comes to things of generational transitions, as well as something that it's got a fancy title. I, for years, wasn't quite comfortable with it until Tom sat me down and explained me really what it means. Family governance. Very impressive title, but all it means is, basically having rules of the road. And Tom, you and Kathy have been blessed. You've have well over 260. I mean, I think I'm probably underquoting the number of multi-generational families you worked with so far. But I know you've had over 20 that have been listed on the Forbes 400 of wealthiest families in America. And not that that's, you don't just only work with wealthy families, but you work with a lot of them because their issues are just as great, if not 2.5 to 3. I think you mentioned the other day, they're actually 2.5 to 3 or 4 times greater, the family challenges in a wealthy family than in a everyday successful family. Do I have that right?
Actually, yeah, Madeline Levine, in her book called The Price of Privilege, she's a clinical psychologist and works with wealthy families, but she and her, we all know that we have an epidemic of going on of anxiety and depression and loneliness and substance issues and you name it. She was finding wealthy families were 2 to 5 times more likely to have those exact same problems present in their families. So wealth is having an effect on families, these presenting problems. We can't just claim it's all mental health issues. There's something going on in the family that's exacerbating it, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Fantastic. And Joel, who's one of our listeners today, but a good friend, I know those are some of the issues too, Joel, that you face and that you help guide through with some of the business families. So again, honored that you would join us today as well. So you can see contact information here for Tom. But by all means, reach out to me or any of us at Wealth Legacy Group, and we'll make sure that you all get connected. If you've got some questions that come from this, or if you're, again, watching the video later on and you want to know how to get in touch. So we can send you the slide deck as well. There's things in here that we're just happy to share because we want to make a lasting positive impact in the world. All right, so our goals for today, and this is meant to be really more just kind of like a fireside chat. We're intentionally leaving it rather unstructured. Yes, we have some slides. Yes, there's some content, simply because if you're an auditory listener, fine, you're good. But if you're a visual or if you're a kinesthetic like me, you're going to want to see some slides. So that's why we threw some things together. But we're going to talk about some of the latest research on how do you build resilient kids and families. What's the latest research show on that? We're going to also talk about a wonderful tool and process of creating effective communication, or empathic communication is another, again, maybe buzzword, but how do we make sure that the listener and the sender are on the same plate together? And then, as I mentioned, Tom and Kathy have built a wonderful game. So in the spirit of Christmas and the holiday season, we're going to go through some of that and share some questions and maybe even some ideas that you could try at your own family gathering. So let's get started, shall we? Now, Tom, walk us through this, because you and I are both, you have, of course, have done a great deal of research on this, but one of my mentors, Roy Williams, who's also a mentor to so many of us in this field, did some incredible research. And then you and Kathy have done further research into families, and particularly wealthy families, and what happens to that financial wealth. So could you unpack this for us a little bit? And I'm going to pull up all of the points for us here, and then just head through it.
Sure. Yeah. Roy Williams and Vic Prescher, a partner of his in doing research in this, they had found decades ago, they really were very early at starting doing research on families and why they were losing their wealth. Their focus was a little bit more on the wealth itself, but interestingly, they talked a lot about how they were losing their connection as well. our research, and that's why this that we're showing here references both Roy's work and also some of the research that we've done. We focus more on the connection, family knowing their history, knowing each other, actually knowing each other beyond the surface level, having a deep level like you might with your best friend. And families were losing that. And that was actually more of the reason of why they were losing their financial wealth than something that they were doing wrong with the financial wealth. And so, yes, what it's showing, we were finding 60% of families by the end of the second generation have lost connection and lost their sense of understanding their family history. And I know we're going to cover it in a minute, but that just, if we're building resilience of families, it blew me away when not only Bruce Feiler's work, but others have found that the number, and we've seen this as well, the number one determining factor of an individual's individual personal resilience of getting through struggle and trials and tribulations is knowing their family history. A lot of people wouldn't have thought that was it.
Yeah, I know. I did not thought we were going there. That's fascinating. Well, and so traditional estate planning, and I'm going to take this third bullet point here. I remember I was going into the gym one day and I was chatting, as everybody in the gym is fair game for me because I just love to ask questions of people and because that's how I get to learn. I'm not exactly an introvert, but I was chatting with this fellow and so I asked him what he did. And he said, well, I'm a financial advisor and to wealthy families. And that piqued my curiosity. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more. What are the kind of things that you do? And how do you transfer the wealth from generation to generation and how do you define wealth? And he kind of looked at me puzzled. He says, what do you mean? How do I define wealth? It's money. It's assets. It's real estate. It's the business. I said, oh, okay, that's great. That's good. What about the other levels of wealth? The relational, the intellectual, the emotional, the spiritual. And he looked at me like I was from another planet. He goes, what are you talking about? We're just talking about getting money from one generation to the next. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that's fascinating. And but unfortunately, in the planning process, that's far too often where we as financial advisors, attorneys, CPAs, and so forth are really focused. It's about taking $1 from generation 1 to get it to generation 2 or generation 3 without going deeper than that. And is it any wonder then that, Tom, one of the things I learned from you that was it's just the flip of what I had been trained with. And that is that the wealth dissipates frequently and most commonly because the families dissipate, not the other way around. Too often we assume that, okay, the families kind of go their own directions, and once the parents are gone, the guardrails are off the bridge. Well, then the families separate, and because the wealth goes away, the money goes away. But your research and that of Roy Williams is just the opposite.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the phrase we often use for business owners is a strong business cannot hold a family together, but a strong family can hold a business together. If you don't have a business, a strong balance sheet, just whatever you have, a strong balance sheet can't hold a family together, but a strong family can hold a balance sheet together. And it's really this idea of why aren't we being a little bit intentional about building the strength of the family? And that's the turning point for so many of the families that we work with, is when they recognize that and then see tools of how to actually do it. It's like, yeah, the light bulb goes off.
Yeah. Well, this research that you're referencing and that you shared with me the other day about family identity and how to really build resilient children and resilient families. Let's go into that a little bit. I love that quote, when a grandparent dies, or a library burns down. I think that's an African saying of some sort, but that's such a great descriptor.
Yeah. How many of us actually, if we have a parent or grandparent that's died, how often did you, after they were gone, just all of a sudden one day realize, oh yeah, I want to ask Gramps, and oh yeah, that's right, he died last year.
Yeah.
It's, oh, you can't ask anymore. So how do we make sure we've asked, and maybe we start archiving these things now, because it's the loss of that family history that, as we mentioned earlier, is an ingredient of your individual resilience. If you know you come from a family and you know the honest stories of good and bad, and that they got through tough times, and I mean, if you've got family stories that go back 100 years, you're talking about people that went through depressions and world wars and major issues. If you have that knowledge that you're related to people that went through those kinds of things, it actually gives you personally, individual, greater resilience. And that's why loss of family identity and history is really powerful and important. And yet so many families don't focus on it. The next one that's equally worth bringing up is the whole notion of not of a lost family history and knowledge of the people that are gone. I don't even know the people that are here now. I've lost connection with the individuals. I often pull up my cell phone and ask people, hey, if you, on your cell phone, if do you have all of your second cousins listed in your cell phone? And if they called you right now, you'd recognize them by voice. And most people go, second cousins? Are you kidding me? No way do I have all of them on there. Many times we don't even have all of our first cousins on both sides of the family in our contact list. Well, then why do we say family is the most important thing, but then we don't live by it? We don't stand up to it. So, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time, but a little bit more intentionality is really important to make that difference.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the final one is the financial wealth is gone. You were saying earlier that, the capital is gone, and the individual you're talking to was talking about the financial capital. That's the tangible assets. What's more important for a family to succeed multi-generationally are the intangible assets. They're often not even identified, so how can you preserve them? And it's some of the things we're going to talk about today to get into what are the inner workings of the people that you call family, so that you can know them better. If you know that and you learn it about it, you can pass it on to your children, let alone to others in the family. And how do we get there, though?
Right. And excuse me, I'm thinking particularly of certain families, and my wife lived through an extraordinary experience of surviving the killing fields of Cambodia. And fortunately, she has written some of that down, or a lot of that down. And so that could be passed along. But for many families, the history of what people lived through and survived, in my case, coming from an Irish family, in the immigration that came from Ireland in the potato famine, I know a lot about the big picture of it, but I don't know about my own family history. And unfortunately, my father died when I was 18, so I lost a lot of that opportunity for understanding more about, kind of his roots and where he came from. So the part of what we're hopefully to going to be talking about today, or encouraging us all to do, is, okay, maybe some of the people that we would have loved to ask questions of are gone, but what about the ones that are still with us? What can we do to find out more about them? And by the way, I'm going to be sharing some things. Mike McKelvey just gave me a quick chat. And by the way, feel free, this is a give and take with each other. Again, very informal. So be sure and send questions or thoughts or comments in the chat box. But Mike just said, gosh, Southern Oregon University is doing has some pointedly curriculum on building resiliency and community. And so, Mike, thanks for sharing that. I'd love to hear more about that and have you share that with Tom and I. So, and maybe if there's time permitting at the end of our time here, we'll just open up the mics and you can share it with us briefly, but share it with us so we can capture it on tape. So thanks for sharing, at least through the chat window. Okay, so let's see. Well, let's jump on, because there's a lot of things that we want to get to yet and don't want to run out of time. So
I know this was my wife's quote, but actually, if you really go back to the root, we have a lot of people that use similar quotes, but St. Francis of Assisi, his quote was, first seek to understand, then to be understood. And we don't do that. That's not how we enter into conversation. We typically want to be understood first. And when we share with you the questions later on, the fun, and they're really kind of fun, but you'll learn a lot about each other. This is where one of these things comes really beneficial. When you start asking some of those questions, video the response from the other person. We have a couple of videos from Christmases and Thanksgiving dinners where we would, everybody would bring a question or two to the table for a grandparent. I've got some precious ones of my mother answering before she died, answering questions of some family members about her growing up in Cuba. And now they're archived though, and we have a chance to share them as a family. So, you know, when you get to this getting to understanding, use your phone to record the understanding you get, because others will benefit from it as well.
I know Stephen R. Covey, and his wonderful research and his comments about listening is that most of the time we're not really listening to each other to understand. We're just waiting for a break in the conversation so we can make our point. And the fact, well, let's go ahead and look at some of the things about listening and the difference between understanding and just coming back and forth in the dialogue. It's not the same as hearing and understanding. Listening is passive, but understanding is very active. And it as you write here, it requires curiosity, empathy, and action. So it's anything but passive. It's very active. And we're going to unpack a little bit about active listening and what that looks like, because that's a gift and an art form that most of us have maybe never been exposed to. But even if we have been, we don't usually implement or use that. So, question, how do we build those resilient families and survive the tough times? And so let's go into more about what you and Kathy, whether that's your lovely bride there, who's a marriage and family therapist, in addition to, and brings that unique skill set and tempering to the conversation.
And notice our mission statement, by the way, because some people, when they look at it, they think it just sounds kind of lame or not very powerful. You're just introducing us to our family, and they assume they know their family so well, but we're introducing them to family at a much deeper level than they actually do know. And it's an ongoing process. That's a lifelong process that they should engage in, but we get them started. So you're right. The next quote, though, comes from, it was interesting. My wife picked up our daughter at college and was bringing her home for a Christmas break. And this is a few years ago. And my wife said on the way home, hey, you know, Sophie, we have an opportunity now while you're here, you're going to have home for a month. We can start to, you know, maybe get some applications out for jobs for when you graduate this fall or this spring, I mean, and so I've got some ideas, and I'd really love to help you and all that. And our daughter just shut down. She's a real counselor style, and she just folded her arms and looked down, and she was quiet the whole way home. And then when she got home, she went right to her room. And my wife recognized, ooh, this didn't go so well. What did I do wrong? And so when our daughter came up, my wife asked my daughter this question. She said, hey, Sophie, what did you hear me say? By the way, that is a brilliant question. You should write it down and engrave it on your forehead, because that is what you should, whenever there's a disagreement, ask people, you know, where did this come from? But she asked, you know, what did you hear me say? And our daughter said, I heard you say you think I'm lazy, stupid, and you don't trust me. And my wife said, oh, I am so sorry. You're right. I came across as if I was applying to college or job, and it's not me, it's you. And I want to support you in your process. And she's just totally apologized. She didn't try to, you know, redirect. She was really just trying to apologize, but it transformed that interaction right there. And it's so difficult, because when somebody finally opens up like that, we often want to defend ourselves. Well, I was I was only, let me just tell you. And what we're basically doing is we're doubling down and making it worse. We're not trying to get to their understanding where they're coming from. We're now trying to we want you to understand our motivation, but that's not what they're looking for at that time. So what did you hear me say is a great question to start unpacking from them where they're coming from. What was your reaction to what I said? And go from there.
And for guys, it's let's just say that we're not as intuitive or observant as our
What are you
female
talking about?
counterparts. So we can learn that. Is it acquired skill? But to be able to watch and see the body language, because body language doesn't lie. And watching the face, the eyes, the shoulders, and how they react. And again, for us guys, it's about learning a different language that women, you are so good at. So please be patient with us as we implement the things that you already know and do so effortlessly. So let's talk a little bit about this empathic communication, because it is something that it is a form, an art form. And unfortunately, most of us have never been exposed to it. And those of us who have been, we may not use it in the most effective way. I remember my late wife and I were in a conversation that was pretty intense, and it seemed like it was getting more intense. And she would say something and I would reflect it back, and which is, mirror the conversation, and I would use her words, and she would say something back and I would mirror what she was saying, and using this form of empathic communication. But she was getting more and more heated. And I finally just asked her, I said, well, why are you getting angry with me? Am I not reflecting back what it is you're saying? She goes, no, you're doing it perfectly. But the issue is you're listening, but you're not being willing to be changed by what you hear. Which that was a great point. Now, sometimes we say that back to those that were listening, if we get to that stage, just because we feel that if I'm sharing with you something, you should be willing to get my point of view and change and understand. And I'm not sure that that's what Laura was wanting to do. She wanted me to listen, and whether I changed my opinion or not, she just wanted me to listen and be willing to be changed by what I heard. So, and let's go in, and we've got just some great chats coming in, guys, and I want to bring that up here in just a moment. So thanks, and continue to bring in comments and ideas through the chat window. But Tom, walk us through this, the 4 key elements to this empathic communication, or a deeper level of understanding and communication.
Right. And yeah, the interaction you had with your wife is a classic one. And it's not necessarily that we have to go in expecting and looking for where and how we're going to individually change. That hopefully will come with time. But if we can at least empathize, and it's really focusing on this issue of they need to feel that we really understand the grief, the pain that they feel. Where is this pain coming from that they feel? And that's different. And I know RJ and I had talked before. I don't see it on decked up. We're not planning on showing the video, I assume, because
yes, I was. There's a great video. Go to what is it, Covey?
Well, just if you look up, it's not about the nail, just type that in. It's not about the nail. You'll see it popping up on multiple different sources, but it is a great example. There actually, when you watch it, I'll just tell you now, there are 2 nails. One you can see and the other you don't. And the whole attempt by one of the individuals is to deal with the nail that he can see, not the one that he doesn't see. And that was the connecting with the heart. And so I really encourage you to watch that. It'll speak volumes, but it gets to this notion of, what typically happens is when we bring up an issue that we have with another person, we bring it up when we're in the issue. We bring it up when the emotions are high and we're already in a conflict mentality, and we'll try, whatever we're going to try, explaining ourselves yet again, or just, whatever we're going to trying to debate it and get them to understand finally. And what our point to these people is often that, look, if you've tried 57 times and it's failed every time, trying a 58th time but doing the same thing is a recipe for failure. I mean, that's the definition of insanity. Wouldn't you like to know a different method? You've got to change your process or pattern of how you've worked with the person. First thing is to de-escalate the energy. Can I remember what the conflict was? And then can I make an appointment at a time when the energies are lower and we can talk rationally about what might have actually transpired in that situation? So make an appointment. We find is really key to say, look, this is something I really want to focus on. If it's in the moment, I would love to think about it. Can we just set a time to come back? I'd love to, really think this through, because that's a really good point you're making. The next part, though, is when we do get together, and whichever one is the sender, the person expressing, hey, RJ, when we were driving, you were driving the other day, and I felt really uncomfortable about whatever, how you were driving, whatever. So I'm expressing a frustration. Hopefully when the escalation, the energy is down. His response, though, is to mirror. And the reason for mirroring is just like RJ was saying earlier, we don't listen with a heart to absorb what we're hearing. We listen with the expectation we're going to deliver back our retort. And which means that at least half of what they're saying, we're probably not hearing, because we're thinking simultaneously what we're going to say back. And so by mirroring back, it changes what's going on in my head. If I'm going to repeat back to RJ what he just said, I have to be listening very closely to everything he said, because I have to say it back verbatim. And so that just, first of all, it turns off my internal energy, but it also gives me now 3 bites at the apple of listening to what he said. I listen to what he said. I'm really listening because I'm trying to memorize it, because I got to say it back to him. So now it's hopefully in my mind a little bit. And then I have to say it back, so I get to hear it a 3rd time as I actually say it myself. And it just gives me more bites on the apple to actually try to absorb where he's coming from. But most importantly, it proves to him I wasn't trying to come up with an answer. It shows him I was really trying to listen. And so that's that mirroring is so important about.
Yeah, and I had one situation where I was doing that, and it was devolving into a more of a debate, and finally I just stopped and I took a deep breath and asked the question, what do you hear me saying right now? And can you reflect back or just repeat back what you hear me saying? And their response was, what, do you think I'm stupid? And I said, no, I don't think you're stupid at all. I just want to see if I'm doing a good job of communicating about this particular issue that seems like we're kind of getting farther and farther apart from understanding or finding a way that we can resolve. Or I'm certainly not feeling heard, but somehow it seems like I'm offending you more. So I don't know, Tom, if you've ever had that experience come up where somebody might say something like that. How would you respond if that was you? If the person says, what, am I supposed to repeat what you said? Do you think I'm stupid?
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. I mean, one of the responses that we found interesting is, I would say something like, do I have your permission to give you a little bit of an insight of how I, and maybe others, but certainly how I experience you? And when they say, what do you mean by that? Well, the way you just asked that question, and the fact that you asked that question, I experience that you're coming across very guarded and not really engaged in wanting to hear where I'm coming from. So it's just a way of, because how do you safely, and you have to get permission from them, and that's why I word it that way. Do I have permission to give you an understanding of how sometimes you can come across? Because I know, there are multiple ways communication can go wrong, because there's not only what I want to say, there's what I actually say, then there's what you heard me say, and then there's what you think about that I meant by it. And oh my goodness, but then you add body language. If you were talking and I'm sitting there like this, and scowling and maybe looking at other direction, I might think I'm listening, but I'm sure not giving you a sense that I'm listening. And even if I actually was listening, I'm sure not giving you a sense that I'm listening. And you might be really getting very uncomfortable with me, even if I heard every word you said. So, when I have a chance to express back to someone, I didn't feel, this was really, it was making me feel really uncomfortable expressing myself to you, because I didn't feel you were interested. And if that's the case, fine. But it was making me feel bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And staying focused on the I statements, talking about this is my feelings, this is how it's coming across for me, rather than making the you statements. Hey, you never listen. You're disinterested. You don't care about me. Those are kind of words that are sort of recipes for disaster, right? But staying in the I statement, gosh, this is when this is said, this is how it makes me feel. so that the other person has a chance to begin to understand and empathize with how that might be coming across, which they may be totally unaware of. Again, there are times where I may be communicating something that I'm not aware of, and I want to know so I can change, but in a way where I don't feel like I'm under fire or the gun's coming out next. How about the next point, Tom, in terms of the clarifying question, which is really a great other point, because not often do we communicate clearly, or do I communicate clearly the first time? Sometimes I do need to clarify.
Right. Yeah. And it gives them a chance. Sometimes, in fact, quite often, when you do repeat back exactly what they said, you wouldn't believe how many times they'll say, you know what? I didn't mean that. I meant it, or maybe there's more I want to add to that, and so being able to say, did I get that right? Did I express what you said? And did I get at the underlying emotion? Is there something larger? Oftentimes there's an underlying story, like, you don't like my dog when I was walking my dog because I didn't know this, but you got bitten by a dog last week. Well, if I'd known that, there's an underlying story there that maybe I would have walked across the street with my dog, but I didn't know that, and so asking for clarification, or is there an underlying story? Is there something here that I want to really get to understanding? Can you help me? Is there something deeper? That's really expressing, I care. I'm willing to take the time because I want to spend time learning about you.
And particularly in families, there's this interaction that comes from the, well, you should know me by now. I mean, we've only been siblings for 37 years. Yeah, but there's, in fact, one of the reasons why we're doing this today, and again, I hope folks are getting some good content from this. We're certainly getting some great feedback. Thank you. But oftentimes we know friends better than we know our family, or at least a number of our family. I don't know who my second cousins are. I barely even know, I think, some of my first cousins. And part of that has to do with some of the dysfunction and the breakdowns in our family, largely because of alcoholism that came down from multiple generations. But, again, I don't know a lot of the stories. I don't know that my sister got bit by a dog last week. That would be important information to know. Now, I don't think she did get bit, but again, not assuming that we know someone just because they have the same last name as we did, or we grew up and went to kindergarten together. And how about this last point? Go ahead.
Well,
Tom.
one thing I want to say about that, and I know we got to keep moving, but what's really important about siblings with siblings, we actually built an awful lot of our relationship with them before we had a fully developed mind.
That's a good point.
Our mind isn't fully developed. If the prefrontal cortex of our mind, which is where the rational thinking comes into play, isn't fully developed to the mid-20s. And yet I've been hanging out with these people since I was about 5, or younger than that, but I remember since very early. And we're building a relationship with them with our reactive brain and our emotional brain before we have a chance to think about it rationally. And the problem with that is that we build these memories based on a reaction and on an emotion that in reality may not be very accurate. As they get old, they change. I changed. Do I give them the grace of giving them the expectation that they may have changed since last I saw them? And can I start from trying to find out how have you changed? How's your life going? What have you learned that's interesting? Because I'd love to share what I've learned too. That's different than just coming back and assuming you're just where you were when I was 10.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, have we changed? So is it possible that sister or brother has changed also along the line? Yeah.
Right.
It's also, when we hear a politician or a pastor or someone who made a quote or said something or did something 30 years ago, and they're being lambasted in social media or on the TV about something they said 15, 20, 25 years ago, I just think, gosh, I don't care about what political party they are. Is it possible that people have matured and maybe they don't feel that way anymore? So we need to certainly give grace, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So wrap us up on this fourth point, because this is such an important point as well, to identify with that underlying emotion that's being expressed.
Right. And that's where to really try and indicate, not just, hey, yeah, I heard you. Interesting. Let me tell you this. That's not identifying with the hurt. Identifying the hurt is to really say, I didn't understand that that's how what I said could have come across. And I can understand, I've actually had situations like that. I can understand, and I can feel that when you say that. And I'm really sorry that I caused that, that I re-triggered that pain in you. But it requires being more involved. You can't just dismiss it and just repeat. You can't repeat back. This is where just mirroring doesn't work. Just repeating back what they said when they said that they were emotionally distraught about something. Being able to really empathize with that requires your heart touching their heart in that conversation. And you've got to say something different and meaningful. And because all of this ultimately relates to, we believe, getting to trust. Well, trust is comprised of three things: reliability, sincerity, and competence is how often people refer to this. Reliability, when I say I'm going to do something, I got to do it. I got to show up. And if I'm not, I'm going to be perceived as untrustworthy. But sincerity, if I'm looking like I'm dismissive, I'm not paying attention, and I don't connect with you, and you feel like you say something and I don't seem to hear it, I'm not evidencing that I sincerely care about you. This is your chance to evidence sincerity by connecting what you believe and what you feel with the emotion that they just expressed. Competence doesn't mean you're incompetent. What it means is you've not worked with each other to train each other of how better to act around each other. That sounds strange, but in reality, you can actually, we have a set of rules of how we've historically worked together, and it hasn't worked. We need new rules, which means
agreement on those rules as well.
Yeah. So competence, you can actually train each other. Hey, would you mind once a month, could we have a conversation, just because I'd like to at least one, or whatever. You can come up with rules or guidelines, guardrails on what is our conversation going to look like going forward, so that we hopefully can, get over some of the past and build something new going forward.
And Tom, last week when we were chatting, you shared a story that I thought was so good about the one sister who was wanting to attend the games of her nephew or niece. I think it was her soccer games, and was asking the other sister, the mom, hey, can you send me a schedule of Johnny's or Susie's soccer match? And part of it has to do with this idea about being reliable, because as I remember the story anyway, the first sister would kind of promise to do something, like promise to come to the game, and yet didn't. Would you tell that story? Because that is, I think, really strikes at the heart of also the concept of family governance, which is a fancy word, but it's really about establishing rules and guidelines and understandings with each other and agreeing to them, and then holding to that. So please, it's such a
because people really get the word governance is the right word, but people think it means all kinds of highfalutin things like family constitution and bylaws and all this kind of stuff. Governance is as simple as, how do we make a group decision together? When you and I were deciding how long this call was going to be today, that was governance. Could I just follow what you said? Okay, that's kind of a unilateral decision. Or did we vote on it? Did we talk about it together? That's governance is as simple as that. If we're going to decide what time we have lunch or dinner tonight, that's governance. So really, all of these things we're talking about is learning how to interact together. And so you can have governance all the way down to the simple level of just talking through, how might I like to be communicated with in the future? What timing, other people around, what questions would I like you to ask, a time frame that we each talk. If I call you once a week and for an hour and you spend 55 minutes talking and I spend 5 minutes talking, I'm not going to continue on with that week after week, because I'm feeling dissed, that you don't care about me. So, just guidelines, what would work for both of us. And it's really helpful to just talk through some of those. So these two sisters, what was interesting is we use these quadrant type assessments, and one was a persuader style, very outside the box thinker, kind of spitballing, loves ideas, likes being, expressive, and the other was an analytical style, opposite corners. And she was really very thoughtful, but really want to get things done efficiently and effectively. Well, the one that was the spitballer would call up and say, hey, I want to attend one of your kids' games. Can you send me the list of all the soccer games and the football games? And there's me. And the other one thought, oh my goodness, what a burden. She keeps calling with these different ideas, and now it's on my shoulders. I got to send her all this stuff, but I know she's not going to show up because she hasn't the last 57 times. So it becomes an impasse. And what ideally would have happened is the one that is the spitballer would have slowed it down and thought about, hey, could you just tell me about one game? I don't want to be a burden to you. And when she tells him about the one game, show up.
Yeah, be there.
And they'd start to be able to actually build new rules, new guidelines that would allow the one that's unreliable from this person's perspective to start evidencing reliability, evidencing sincerity, because they actually wanted to know about one game that they would show up at, and then being able to communicate about that. So that you can set very practical guidelines, but that is actually governance. That is learning how to make decisions that we're both going to be able to work within. Elevate that then from there, and you can make decisions on much more complex issues. But we learned by doing small.
That's great stuff. And I guess I want to, there are several comments that have been made along the way. Dan Wolf had shared from Daniel Yankovic's book, The Magic of Dialogue, Transforming Conflict into Cooperation. It's a great book on how to create dialogue. And it's, I think, was also pointed out that Mortimer Adler, who was the president of the University of Chicago, has also a great deal of training and teaching on this. And it was shared that another colleague would oftentimes, who was a very skilled negotiator, would go back and remind himself of the things that Dr. Adler and others had talked, particularly on listening, because it's such a part of our life that's so important. And yet how seldom do we really remind ourselves of that, how much we're trained in how to be an effective communicator. But as the WAG has said, we've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should be listening twice as much as we're talking, if not more, listening more.
Right.
And by the way, also Joel made the comment as well that this is why it's so important for governance and with a family-owned business, why it's imperative to have a family council, have that group there to create this governance, these sets of rules, of understandings, of agreements, for particularly for all family-owned businesses. It's just critically important. And I know you do that, Tom, in your work as well. So let's.
We want to get to the game, so we have to move on.
Yeah.
I'll just briefly read through the next slide if you can pull it up, because my wife came up with, she wanted you all C words on this, but to really, for healthy family communication, be curious of the other person. Think of it that way as you're entering into the conversation. Evidence you're caring. You know, am I willing to show to the person that I really care about them? And if I'm really engaging, spending the time, hopefully I am. Commitment, will I invest the time to actually do this going forward? Showing the reliability, building trust. Consistency, how long will it take? Sometimes it takes a while because they're so used to the way I've reacted, I've behaved for my whole life up to now. I can't change and then assume that they're going to now right away give me carte blanche forgiveness for the last 55 years of doing it the wrong way. So consistency, it might take a while for them to really see that I'm changing. And then confidence, you know, what part do I need to change, and can I confidently actually evidence that I'm willing to do it? But those are, you know, in the material that you can take a look at. The next quote though came from the Green family, and I love this. This came from one of the grandchildren, actually a spouse of one of the grandchildren. The Green family of Hobby Lobby fame, they have a family meeting every month. And they actually celebrate the people that had birthdays that year. They celebrate successes in people's lives. They ask deep questions about, what are you particularly gratified about that, what you accomplished this month? Can you share that with us? They don't go all the way around the room. They just focus on the people that is their month. Like, this is Joel's month, and next month is Carly's, and then it's Karen's, you know. And they really try and dive deep and have the whole group really celebrate that person. And what was really cool about it is one of the grandchildren, she introduced me to her husband, and new husband. They only been married about 6 months. And he said, yeah, this family's powerful because even when we were just dating, significant others, they were inviting me to that meeting and they got to know me and they celebrated me. And I felt connected. And he said this quote, he said, and as you can see in the screen, this family recognized that we need to build a bridge of grace and trust with each other so we can drive the truck of truth over it. The 3 underlined words there are key: grace, trust, and truth. And we often do exactly the opposite. We want to speak truth. Here's what I'm upset about with you. That's my truth. So I'm legitimate. This is good because I'm telling truth, right? But I haven't built the grace, which is the forgiveness, the curiosity, the empathy. I haven't built the grace, so I don't have, this bridge to drive the truck of truth over. If I can start with grace, it can build the trust. And the trust will allow me to speak the truth. If I haven't built the grace and the trust, don't speak the truth yet.
And that's where timing, maybe the timing, setting the time, hey, can I talk with you about this particular issue or something? And you set up a time to do that, because at the moment when the emotions may be the highest, it's probably not a really good time to go try and drive that truck over the bridge, right?
Right.
It may go off the bridge.
Yeah, the bridge is going to collapse underneath it because there's no bridge there. We've got a couple of twigs holding it up.
The Bible talks about speaking the truth, but with love, in love.
And that's so powerful. You say that you wouldn't believe how many. We have a Christian father right now that his relationship with some of his sons is like they're in lawsuits together. He is a wonderful Christian father, but he only speaks truth. He hasn't built a relationship with them where they feel like he's connecting with them. And it's to the point. I mean, again, watch that. It's not about the nail. In that case, you can't talk about the nail you see until you've addressed the nail you don't see, which is that one that's hidden in the heart. And you've got to get to that. So please watch that video. It's not
my
about
attorney,
the nail.
Our in-house attorney said I absolutely could not show the video. So sorry about that, but you got to watch it. It's very funny. And that makes a great point as well.
Oh, huge.
You have the Rogerson family. You've created your own little game for us, if you will, and for others. Why don't you walk us through that? What's this all about?
Sure. We use this at family meetings where we'll have the family actually, and we'll go through the rules here where we want them to pair up into groups, just 2 pairs. And for 10 minutes, we're going to have one be the person asking questions and the other one responding. And then they switch after 5 minutes, and the other one asks the questions. And then after 10 minutes, and both have gone back and forth, then we switch the pairings. So they have another, and we actually spend some time on this. And so we tried to come up with some questions that they would spend some time on, but we asked them to ask the first question on the next page, which you'll see in a second. And then they, move on through the other questions. And when they get to question number 9 on the list, we ask them to actually try and mirror back what they heard. It's baby steps, because my wife, when she created the empathic communication, there are 3 parts to it. One is getting to understanding, which is what this is all about, but it can be fun. 2 is being able to express a frustration in a safe way. And that's asking for the appointment and saying it and mirroring and all those kinds of things. 3 is getting to repair. We don't have time to go into that now, but ultimately you want to get to repair. And there's really methods to get to repair, because many of them people will go through the first 2, but they don't know how to change. They don't know what exactly to do. And if they don't know what to do, then it's just they're staring at each other. So, and be curious in the process. But when you look at these questions, the ones that we would say are the, for 5 minutes and then switch. Well, those are just the rules to it. Oh, and again, this doesn't have the actual questions.
And here's a reminder also, folks. So if you want this, just shoot us an email. Please, I'm not going to be able to get everything down to the chat window. So please just send an email to rj@wealthlegacygroup.com, rj@wealthlegacygroup.com. And we'll make sure to get you the slide deck. We'll make sure to get you some of these wonderful questions.
The other one I'd be happy to send some of the additional questions as well that I don't have here, but my email address is on there as well. And just shoot me or copy me in the email you send to RJ, and I can send you out some of the additional slides that were not in this as well.
Tom, give us your email address real quick while you're speaking.
Sure, it's Tom at GenLeg Co, which is in front of you, GenLeg Co on my little window there, .com. So tom@genlegco.com. And these questions, though, number one was, and this is a pretty powerful question, share 2 or 3 things that you have accomplished for which you are particularly proud of, and what was deeply satisfying to you about that accomplishment. And try to diversify your answers. Don't just give career-oriented ones. And usually you'll find that they'll say something about their childhood that, in recess, and what they did to help another kid get up or something. Boy, you want to connect at the heart level, you're going to find out more about them, because ultimately what you want to know about these people, what drives them? What is that? What motivates them? What are the fears that they have inside that actually might be equally motivating to them? So that's a great question that we encourage the family to ask of everybody in the family. The others they can pick and choose from, but you'll see that, share something you have done, but would like to try, and you would like to try, and why. Oh, that you haven't done that you'd like to try, and why. Sorry, I can't read this I'm looking at my own writing. But there's some great questions here. The number 9th one I'll just jump to, because this is the one that we encourage them to mirror it back, is name something you think that makes this family stronger. What needs to happen for this to be accomplished? What could we do to be stronger as a family, and what would we need to do to accomplish this? And try and practice mirroring back, just to start the process of helping to go to the next step, which is, how do we express a frustration and feel like we've been heard? So now Bruce Feiler, he has a wonderful group that I think comes up as well next, of 20 questions. He's some of the research we mentioned earlier that we're going to mention to you, of some of the studies that have been out showing that the number one determining factor of an individual's resilience in life is, do they know their family history? Are they connected? Do they feel connected to others? This notion of being connected is really powerful. So there's some great questions in there. There's 20 of them, but it's really worth going through them, and they're fun. And you can ask them at the dinner table, and you can learn so much about your family. Last thing I'll say from that standpoint is that this idea of you want to give people an opportunity to feel like they have a role in this family, even if it's nothing other than just feeling connected. I mean, you want to feel connected and feel like you have a role in the family. And this is the time of year when you're going to see reruns of It's a Wonderful Life. Right. The question I often ask families is that really nowadays the Gen Yers and the Gen Xers don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll often start by saying, how did Clarence start the process of saving George Bailey? And they'll look at me like, who the heck is George Bailey, and who the heck is Clarence? And well, George Bailey was the one that was about to jump off the bridge, if you watch the It's a Wonderful Life. And Clarence, the angel, the way he saved George was, before George could jump off the bridge, Clarence jumped off the bridge, fell in the water, turned around, looked up, and yelled, "Help." And instantly he gave George Bailey a purpose. And the rest of the movie is him showing and reminding George of the purpose he had in his life. And I think what you're doing by engaging family members and trying to get to really understand them, you're going to learn a lot about yourself and your family that you didn't know, but you're also giving them a role. You're giving them a purpose. You're giving them connection. And we are built by God to be connected. We are relational and productive, and we often focus on the productive part, not the relational part. And we hope you're going to find this a fun game to go through with your family to around the dinner table, and then bring your cell phone and video the answers. You're going to get some real archiving of history that'll be very helpful.
And speaking of communication and about connecting, several of you have asked if we could connect up those that have been listening today. And so, because of non-disclosure reasons, we don't want to do that. But if you go ahead and type in the chat window right now, just type your email address, if that's okay with you, that we connect you all up. Just take a minute, type in your email address and just say, okay, or something. And then we'll share that with those so we can sort of build community from today's event as well. Tom, would you just walk us through big picture in particular? You've been very helpful for me in learning to grow my EQ, my emotional intelligence, not just my IQ. But so I've taken several courses and classes now, and more to come. But what would you want folks to take away from this?
Well, great. And yeah, good point that EQ is really interesting and important. We focus on IQ, but IQ is a known number and you can't really affect it very much in your lifetime. It's a, people have a certain IQ. And if you look at success of individuals over time, as their IQ goes up, their success tends to increase, but only up to a point. There's a point when their IQ keeps going up and their success in life starts to diminish. And but some people are succeeding beyond that and somehow continuing to succeed. And ones that are able to continue to succeed beyond their level of IQ are ones that are evidencing EQ, emotional quotient, an understanding of emotions and how to work with other people. That you can affect, actually. The things we're talking about can actually help you affect that. You can actually be 2 times more effective on average if you build your EQ than your IQ would have allowed you to become. And so, just trying to play the role of being wicked smart, as we say here in Boston, wicked smart. I'm wicked smart, but that only gets you so far. If I can be wicked connected, that's even better. And so I encourage you to do that. David Brooks is the one that came up with this idea of being weavers. If you haven't seen David Brooks's TED Talk, I really encourage you to. And it's one of his more recent ones, but he gets into that idea that happiness is the expression of self, but joy is the dissolving of self into others, to feel needed while you're engaged. It's really powerful and well done. But there are a number of things here on this list. There's 5 here that are really important. You are better together than you are separately. You each bring different strengths and blind spots to the table. Can we talk about our strengths and our blind spots? Try to break through the floor and get to the underlying need. What is motivating that person? What fears do they have? What keeps them up at night? Those are worth asking. And you may find that they're changing, and they've changed a lot from what you think. And the story you're telling about where they are may not be right at all. Forgiveness is the release of resentment and anger. If you forgive somebody else, it helps you. Yes. One of my friends has a great quote. He says, unforgiveness is like eating rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. Yeah. They didn't eat it, you did. And then develop your EQ. The other 6 or the other 5 anyway, are, speak words of affirmation is really important. Use empathic communication, that idea of mirroring back, asking deeper questions, making sure you're being really heard and clarifying it and all. Find powerful role models or roles for everyone in the family, everyone on the bus. In other words, everyone in the family ought to have a role. If you feel somebody doesn't measure up, you have some work to do. Help them find a role. They do. Everybody has a value and a role in the family. If you want to be a legacy family, you need to always assume the best of each other. And we don't often do that. We come bracing ourselves for what we expect to be the worst from them. What you're expecting, you will see.
Yes.
If you're bad. If good or bad, if you're expecting bad, you will find evidence in everything they do. If they act perfectly nice, they're faking it. Boy, they're just so fake. Come on, then they can never win. So, and then the last one, if you have economic resources, I would encourage you, don't just invest in the next stock market or the next annuity or the next, you name it. Invest in your family, and you can actually that's the money, the intangible rewards you will grow and preserve in your family are worth every penny you might put into this endeavor.
And Tom, to speak to that, we have a wonderful article that you taught me the concept about the Family Legacy Trust, and you call it a fast trust. But for us, we call it a family legacy, and it's a trust that most families, in fact, none that I've ever met have, but where there's money set aside, not to be distributed to the next generation for them to go spend, but no, it's money that's set aside to be able to spend on the family. And to how do we pass along the virtues and the value system generationally? Anything else you want to add on that quickly? Because it is such a powerful idea. Everyone should have that in their estate plan. And again, they don't.
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, I do think it's a separate ideally separate pool of money, separate, ideally a trust, designed to endow this. But it is money to be used not to distribute to beneficiaries, but to invest into beneficiaries as a group. And again, if you got my email address on there as well. If you want to shoot me, I can send you articles on that trust idea, what it looks like. I'm happy to do it to anybody, but we're just taking a piece, just a piece of what, just part of the process we take families through. And that one of the 7 steps is empathic communication. And one of the 3 steps of empathic communication is getting to understanding. And that's where you explore the other people that we call family, these strangers we call family. So that's why we just picked out that to kind of help bless you this Christmas season. We hope it is a blessing for you and that you'll try using some of this with your family.
One of the sayings that has come out these last couple of years is, again, another African saying: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So it's been a wonderful delight to have you with us. Again, I see many of you have typed in your email address. If you still want to, kind of be part of the sharing group, just jot your email address in the chat window and say, okay. We'll know that afterwards we'll send out links so y'all can get connected up. Some great, I know many of you, but there's some folks here that I don't know, but that we want to. You can text, if you go to just type in on your phone, WLG, if you text that to 22828, that's where you want to send it to, 22828. WLG will know that you want to connect up on just following up on our dialogue today. We have some gifts we want to send to you, absolutely no obligation on your part. One is what we call quote action, where it provides a great quote, a very thought-provoking idea or challenge, and then there's a challenge that goes with it. So that's the action part. But again, we've got now hundreds and hundreds of people that get these quote actions every day or twice a week or once a week, and you can change it anytime you want. It's completely free and nobody will call you unless you reach out. We do have some other things on our website at Wealth Legacy Group that there are just a ton of great resources there. This video will be there as well. So if you want to send your friends over there to listen to Tom, you can go over there and there's great stuff to find. Here's an example of quote action. You can't live a perfect day without doing something for someone who will never be able to repay you, by the famous coach, UCLA coach, John Wooden. Your action for today is to make an honest donation or do something nice for someone without them finding out you did it. And again, right now we're recording this in December at Christmas time, so maybe this would be a good challenge for all of us. What's a gift or something that you can do for someone without them finding out that you did it for them? So today we looked at building resilient kids and families and how to do that based on really getting to know your family and the history of the family generationally. Tom shared a whole bunch of great content with us you're going to want to watch again, but particularly 4 key elements for effective communication. And thank you, Tom and Kathy, for sharing with us the Rogerson family meeting game and also the 20 questions for just discovery. Unfortunately, time-wise, we're out of time for today. Let me just take a quick look in the chat window. Well, thank you. There's a number of lovely, lovely thoughts in here. Thank you for that. And gosh, with this closing, just want to say thank you so much that you could join us and be with us today. Again, Tom Rogerson. Tom, you reach out directly to Tom or reach out to us, and we can put you in touch with Tom. Tom, as always, I learn from you every single time.
Back at you, brother.
And so this has been great. Those of you listening and still with us, you're part of the Wealth Legacy Group family. You're part of the GenLeg company family. Thanks so much for joining us today. God bless. Have a wonderful Christmas and holiday season, a wonder-filled time as you discover more about your family and about generationally how to keep it together. Thanks for being with us today. God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless. Thanks, RJ. Bye-bye, everybody.